Hello, welcome back to our discussion of the respiratory system. In this video, we're going to be going over intrapleural pressure. Okay, so first I just want to start by reminding you of the pleura. Okay, the pleura are these membranous sacs that lie outside of our lungs. So you can see here is one pleural sac. Here is another pleural sac. One membrane of the pleural sac is going to adhere to the lung. The other membrane of the pleural sac is going to adhere to the inside of the rib cage, okay? And here's another view. So if you cut yourself in the middle like this, this is what your view of the pleura would be. It would be this dark blue structure right here, okay? I also want to remind you, the pleura are filled with fluid, okay? So intrapleural pressure is the pressure in the pleural space. So we're going to be talking about intrapleural pressure in this video. Okay, so I'm going to start by saying intrapleural pressure is subatmospheric. It's below atmospheric pressure, okay? And I'm going to explain to you why that is. If you look at this diagram right here, what you can see is basically the reason that intrapleural pressure is subatmospheric is because we have two factors that are both pulling out on the pleura, okay? The first of those factors is your rib cage right here, okay? So your ribs, basically, I don't know if I can show this, but they have a tendency to like bow out, okay? But because we're kind of pulling in on them with the pleura, actually, they're being bent beyond where they want to be, right? So they would prefer to be like this, but we're kind of pulling on them, pulling in on them like this, okay? So since they're attached to the pleura, they want to come out like this. They're pulling outwards, as indicated by these arrows, okay? So that's one side of the pleura. We have this outward pull, okay? On the inside of the pleura, we have the lungs with their natural tendency for elastic recoil, right? So remember that the lungs are kind of like a balloon. They want to collapse, but they're being held in place by the pleura, okay? So the lungs are trying to move inwards, or they're trying to collapse. We have this elastic pull inwards. So we're pulling kind of on both sides of the pleura, okay? And because of that, the pressure of the fluid that's inside the pleura falls because we're pulling on both sides of it, okay? So that's why intrapleural pressure is subatmospheric. Moving on, what does that mean for the lungs? That subatmospheric intrapleural pressure actually allows the lungs to stay inflated. Okay, so since we have a subatmospheric pressure inside of the pleura and an atmospheric pressure usually, I guess, at rest, and atmospheric pressure inside of the lungs, right? We have a higher pressure in the alveoli than we have in the pleural space, which means that this pressure that's inside the lungs is helping it to, it's kind of like propping it open, okay? We're pushing out on the lungs to keep them inflated, okay? Hopefully that makes sense to you. Now what I would like you to do is consider this question here. What do you think would happen if the pressure was the same on both sides? If you had the same pressure inside the lungs as you had inside the pleura, okay? So go ahead, I think you need to hit pause for this one and think about that. And then when you're ready, you can move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is what happens to your lung when you have equal pressure inside of your lung and in the pleura, okay? So this is a condition called pneumothorax, and basically it results from like a breakage in the pleura or in the lung wall, okay? So this can happen If you get stabbed with a knife, it can happen if you break your rib and your rib like punctures the wall of your lung. It can happen if you get a weakening of your lung tissue such that it eventually ruptures. But in any of those cases, basically what happens is the pleural space, which is shown here in white, is now able to equilibrate with atmospheric pressure. Okay, so what's going to happen is you have atmospheric pressure in your pleural space, you have atmospheric pressure inside of your lungs. You no longer have that difference. You no longer have that your higher pressure inside of the lungs, pushing the lung to keep it inflated. Okay, so what happens as a result is because the lung has a natural elastic recoil, it is going to collapse. Okay, so again, hopefully that makes sense to you. Okay. All right, one last topic that I want to address here with intrapleural pressure is I want to talk about how intrapleural pressure changes as we breathe. Okay, so another place where I want you to hit pause and think about this question. Basically, what do you think happens to the pressure in the pleura during inspiration and expiration? Do you think it increases or decreases? So go ahead and hit pause until you're ready to talk about it. Okay, so this is what intrapleural pressure looks like as we breathe. And I will explain to you. Hopefully you figured it out, but I'll walk you through it. Okay, so we're going to start here. This is the beginning of an inspiration. Okay, as we breathe in, remember that the way we do that is we expand our rib cage. Okay, as we expand our rib cage, basically we're increasing the outward pull on the pleura, right? Remember, we have this outward pull. So I'm going to turn like this, outward pull of our rib cage. Remember, our lungs are still trying to collapse, basically, right? So we're expanding that area there, or that pull on the intrapleural space, okay? And as a result, we have a fall in pressure in that space, okay? As we expire, the opposite happens, right? So we're collapsing our rib cage or bringing it in, okay? That's going to reduce the amount of outward pull on the pleura, and the intrapleural pressure will go back up, okay? Also just kind of want to note to you that intrapleural pressure is always subatmospheric. So these are relative to 0, right? So -3, -4, and so on, millimeters of mercury, okay? All right, and then finally, I just want to, I don't think I'll really go over this, but just want to draw your attention to this figure, which you've already seen. It's a summary of our pressure and volume changes during breathing, and it can just kind of help you remember everything that's happening.